In the First Berserker Khazan, there are a ton of things you can do to become OP extremely early in the game, whether it's some of the better higher damage skills, investing in certain stats in your skill tree, or just unleashing the ultimate combos for each weapon. I'm going to show you how to become OP early. First, before we talk about how to become OP early, is to talk about what stats are important. First Berserker Khazan revolves completely around stamina, keeping your stamina gauge as full as possible, as long as possible, so that way you can always dodge attacks and unleash the most insane combos. As you begin to level, you're going to be able to upgrade your stats using the Blade Nexus, using a currency called Lacrima that you'll get by defeating enemies and finding throughout the missions. One thing to note is you shouldn't necessarily be afraid to go ahead and upgrade and experiment with your stats. You can always find primeval regression orbs throughout the campaign that will allow you to reset stats and actually return all that XP to you to reuse. This will let us experiment quite a lot, but ideally I would want to say the first thing you want to focus on here is Vitality, mainly because Vitality is going to give you the most health possible. Each upgrade gives you 50 health, meaning if you get 20 points in Vitality, you essentially get an extra 1000 HP. It's seriously going to help, and again, it's the only stat on this board that actually gives you resistance. Now, Endurance gives you more stamina and stamina recovery rate, but I would spec a little bit less into this out of the beginning because you can get stamina from other things like gear and weapons. Now, as far as some of our skills go, there's some very OP skills that can just absolutely demolish enemies. But first, you have the common skill tree, and some of these are actually way better than you would think. First off, you want to pay attention to these specific three under the resource section. This is going to be Opportunistic Spirit, Berserk Spirit, and Indomitable Spirit. The cool thing with Opportunistic Spirit is it actually allows you to gain Spirit upon performing a brink dodge, meaning if you time a dodge perfectly, you actually gain Spirit, which will allow you to do all kinds of different special Spirit attacks depending on what weapon you're using. Especially if you're playing a primarily dodge-based build, doesn't actually reward you with any Spirit at all. If you dodge perfectly 100 out of 100 times, you get no Spirit for it. However, if you upgrade this to the max or even put a couple points here, this means that each dodge will grant you Spirit, meaning you can perform those high damage attacks basically for free. Now, the same kind of goes for Indomitable Spirit. Indomitable Spirit actually increases the Spirit accumulation upon performing a brink guard. So essentially, when you perform a brink guard or a perfect guard, you automatically gain Spirit. By investing one single point in the skill, you actually accumulate Spirit much quicker. From what I was able to tell, basically 33% more. And you're going to really notice this if you're playing a brink guard heavy focused build, meaning you're going to be getting a ton of Spirit accumulation early. And the other skill, Berserk Spirit, increases your Spirit accumulation upon attack, meaning every attack you hit on enemies, you're going to be getting more Spirit from that in general, to where you get about 20 to 30% more Spirit just by having 1 point spec here. I think if you had to pick between all three, Indomitable Spirit is probably the best, but they're all very good and can get you tons of Spirit very quickly. Now, another skill to consider here is Reflection. Now, Reflection is a little bit harder to perform. Essentially, you need to use your L1 and triangle button on PlayStation, which you can do by holding your guard button and then pressing your potent blow button at the right time, so that way your swing actually meets the enemies. This is what it looks like, and not only does it do an insane amount of damage when you land it, but it also does a ton of stamina damage. Practicing reflecting enemies' attacks is probably the most OP attack in the game, but make sure first you grab the reflection skill at a minimum. But early in the game, when you only have so many mastery points, I would definitely recommend grabbing Reflection Swift. This is going to shorten the activation time for your reflection, meaning the timing is much more forgiving and it's easier to time. Now, something else important you could grab early on is in the Brutal Attack section. I would also consider taking Brutal Attack Reap even very early, and the primary reason is especially when it comes to boss fights or just regularly exploring the missions, this is going to restore a decent amount of your health upon using your brutal attacks from the front, meaning that brutal attacks are going to reward you with huge damage, but also help you restore some of that health, especially early in the game when you don't have many health potions. Restoring some of your health this way very consistently can help you survive a lot of the fights and help you progress through the game a lot quicker. If you take any of these common skills on the left, this is what I would recommend taking. Now we're going to look at the dual wield skills and what, in my opinion, are some of the most OP. So I've already started playing a brink dodge build, and regardless of whether you're playing spear, greatsword, or dual wielding, whether you're playing dodge or brink like primarily, I would definitely invest a lot of points there first. This is going to help you deal a lot of damage early, as well as up your defenses and stamina, because the only way you lose this game is by dying, and one of the big ways you die is by running out of stamina. So for instance, for dual wielding, I spec'd into blowback, which actually deals damage to enemies upon brink guards, meaning every time I land a brink guard, the enemy takes regular and stamina damage. And I also put 3 out of 3 here in Ironclad, so that way it decreases stamina consumed upon a successful guard. You can definitely consider putting 3 out of 3 here for Penetrate, as it significantly decreases the stamina cost for dodging, which means we get a ton of dodges for for free. Even if we don't land any perfect brink dodges, we can dodge like non-stop and then immediately replenish our stamina and dodge like 15 more times, as well as the upgrade to brink guards and the reduced stamina there. Now the main thing here is I would recommend two specific skills that are absolutely broken for dual wield weapons, and that is Gale and Gale Scar. Essentially what Gale does, it allows you to hold and charge your dual wielding potent blow and then essentially stab into an enemy, inflict them with the injured status, meaning that they're bleeding, and then what happens is you'll gain the vigor effect every time an injured enemy actually takes damage. What's cool about this is your damage dealt actually increases for each stack you have on the enemy up to 10 stacks, meaning you can deal an extreme amount of increased damage when an enemy has 10 stacks of this on them. And then Gale Scar actually allows you to explode that gathered vigor or that 10 stacks to deal significant damage to them all at once. What's great about Gale is it can actually stun lock an enemy as well as basically totally deplete their stamina bar with just a little bit of stamina of your own, allowing you to exhaust them without them basically ever being able to attack you in a lot of cases. Now if playing dual wield, you should also invest in the outrage skill. This is going to allow you to essentially slam an enemy on a sprint, which does tons of heavy damage and it can actually one-shot a decent amount of enemies. Keep in mind, remember on our common skill tree, if we're using Berserk Spirit and Indomitable Spirit, we're going to be generating a ton of spirit for our build, meaning having something like Ruthless is a great combo because it's going to allow us to spend all that free spirit that we're generating and unleash these huge attacks, especially when fully upgraded. You can see our huge slam here, just wiping out enemies in one hit, and then comboing that with our spirit skill that then just goes to town, demolishing the other. Now, if you find Gale just makes your build way too overpowered, which it probably does, you can swap that out for Dragon Slayer. And the cool thing with Dragon Slayer is you can hold your potent blow to actually deal a dash attack. And once you combine that with the upgrade for intuition, you can actually press Y again and change that into a double slash attack that deals quite a lot of damage. You can see here upon charging it, it hits pretty hard, and then it can also chain into some pretty big damage very quickly, especially when you dodge an attack and then just jump right back into it. It hits really, really hard. Those couple skills makes this build early on extremely good for the dual wield. Now next we'll talk about the spear and what makes it absolutely broken, especially early in the game. Primarily we're focusing around Moonlight, which is our swift attack, and then Moonlight stance. The way this works is when your regular attack or Moonlight strikes an enemy, you actually enter Moonlight stance, which deals additional after image attacks, and it actually lasts for 15 seconds, meaning that once you have this at level 3, you're dealing a bunch of extra stamina damage, and with this setup, this means you can essentially always be in Moonlight stance without even having to try, giving us automatic tons of free damage. Now Moonlight stance vitality gives us increased stamina recovery rate while in Moonlight stance, which again is going to be up all of the time, and that way, so while charging in Moonlight stance, it will actually change your potent blow, and it decreases the charging speed and increases the attack's horizontal range. And once you complete that third swift attack of Moonlight, this will put you into Moonlight stance. And you can see here, if we complete our swift attack combo, we're then going to enter Moonlight stance, meaning we can charge up our potent blow and deal tons of damage, especially tons of stamina damage. And also one of the most OP skills for the spear is going to be 0 point for your potent blow. This makes it so that if you're hitting an enemy with potent blow or a vital strike, essentially you can hit the square button. It will actually perform a bunch of consecutive stabs that can deal massive damage. If you press square after 0 point, this will chain it into a final swift attack, but if you hit Y, it'll actually chain into assault and shadow reversal. And make sure you take Fortress here for increased damage. Now what's cool about this is we can go and chain from a potent blow straight to 0 point, straight into shadow reversal all at the same time. Now the shadow reversal chain skill is great because during a swift attack or during that setup, you can actually press Y to do a thrust with your spear, and pressing Y after the attack actually repositions you behind the enemy if their stance is broken. Combine that with shadow reversal impact and you can break the stance of more enemies and increase the amount of shock that shadow reversal deals, meaning you can get behind enemies and deal more damage to them much more often. What's great is you can chain your potent blow into the bunch of consecutive stabs and then combine that with your shadow reversal, dealing tons of damage and huge combos. And again, you can cycle those combos repeatedly, meaning you can hit triangle to do a potent blow, hit square to do your 0 point turn consecutive stabs, and then hit Y again to do your shadow reversal attack, followed by another Y to essentially slash behind the enemy. Make sure you also combine this with breakdown for your guard, so you actually increase stamina damage dealt to the enemy hit by a brink guard. Rod smite, so if you brink guard an enemy, you can immediately swiftly counterattack them, which you can also chain into a bunch of the other combos. And Phantom Heat Wave. This is going to be important because whether you're fighting a boss or regular enemies, it spins the spear to block all attacks with brink guards for a short duration. It also deals counter strike damage to the enemy when blocking attacks, and it upgrades the aura strikes of Moonlight and Full Moon for 30 seconds upon use, meaning you're dealing extra damage for 30 seconds every single time you cast this. You can see here if we use this, no matter what attacks they go to hit us with, we're basically dealing counter attack damage, but also keeping us completely free from damage ourselves, basically being invincible and killing that enemy at the exact same time. So with the Greatsword, we can do a ton of OP damage with this very early, and that's because of a couple of these skills that I'm going to show you. Primarily the swift attack section, you can go into Savage Momentum. What this actually lets you do is charge your regular swift attack, meaning it gains a ton of area and a ton of damage. That way we can attack enemies way out in front of us. As you can see, we can stand pretty far back and just swipe at this guy, and if there were a bunch of enemies right here, they would all get hit by this as well, making it a really OP upgrade to our basic skill. Then you can upgrade into Mortal Blow. This makes it so if we do a potent blow after a swift attack, it actually channels energy into the sword and delivers a much more powerful, higher damage swing. And if you pair this with the Mortal Blow upgrade, it actually enables chaining into Mortal Blow after dodge attacks and sprint attacks, meaning if we were to do a regular sprint attack, that we could then charge into a Mortal Blow, or we could just simply sprint at an enemy, do a sprint attack, and then do a Mortal Blow directly after for huge damage. Now if you actually take Heat of Battle, it'll increase your poise and decreases damage taken while attacking, meaning while we're face tanking enemies and just demolishing them, we'll be taking a lot less damage this way and able to break their guard and stagger them much easier with increases to our poise. Additionally, when you take that damage while attacking, you get increased damage here for that ongoing attack, and you actually gain spirit from it for free. And then with heavy pressure, it decreases the charge time for an attack skill that actually follows a charged attack. So if you see we do a charge attack here, it takes a little long, and then we can immediately do another charge attack and it goes much quicker, meaning you can spam some of these much faster. Now again, we can select overrun, so you can actually hit square after a dodge attack to actually deliver an additional attack after your dodge attack. Keep in mind that means we can also chain this into our Mortal Blow since we have the Mortal Blow upgrade skill. You can also spec into Helmbreaker, so forward dodge attacks and sprint attacks can actually be charged, meaning you do a front flip in the air and actually do this really cool, powerful like downward slash attack, which is really cool. Here you can chain a dodge attack into Mortal Blow for free, again making one dodge lethal for any enemy. And then finally we want the upgrades to our Potent Blow, which will increase the range of a charged Potent Blow, meaning we can stand back at a pretty far distance and just spam these at enemies and deal tons of damage to them this way. But we also want the Ghost Arm Block skill, so that way while charging a Potent Blow, it'll actually guard against enemy attacks using this Ghost Arm while you're charging it, performing a Brink Guard that actually deals damage to the enemy. Not only keeping you safe during your Potent Blow as long as you have stamina, it'll actually increase the activation speed of your next Potent Blow that you charge after chaining it with Ghost Arm Block. You can see if we're going to hit here during our Potent Blow while we're charging it, we can hit our guard button. This will allow us to perform a perfect guard, meaning we can immediately jump right back into the attack, and it gives you a ton of free protection. This way we don't have to worry about not being able to charge our guard up because we have infinite defense from it since we're able to guard during this attack. And then finally we have our spirit attack, which is Giant Hunt, which you can actually charge and use more spirit for to deal huge waves of damage to enemies when they're vulnerable, which is especially useful for much bigger enemies and bosses, because once you can exhaust them or get them to a point where they're vulnerable to an attack, you can basically just charge this and slam this down on them. As you can see, we'll go ahead and charge this up and deal tons of damage to him with one single swing. Again, we can just charge up our Potent Blow, deflect any attack that comes in our way. If he happens to attack during it, we exhaust him immediately and then just destroy him in a singular another hit. The Greatsword deals tons of huge damage to enemies, and these skills are especially OP early in the game. Now, something that's going to also determine how OP you can actually become at the beginning, you can see dual wielding scales with willpower and strength, the Greatsword scales with strength and proficiency, and the spear scales with proficiency and willpower. So if we were to equip the spear, we want to pay attention to our proficiency. Proficiency had a B and willpower actually had a grade of a C, meaning if we were to put points in willpower, we would actually gain +3 attack damage for our stats. But if we were to upgrade proficiency, we would actually gain 4 attack damage to our stats. And even though our stats upgrade specific things for our builds, you want to make sure if you're looking specifically at attack damage, that one of your highest upgraded stats is one of your higher scaling stats for your weapon, like proficiency for the spear in this case. If you're a Greatsword user that scales with strength and proficiency, again, when we go to upgrade our stats here with the Greatsword equipped, you can see if we actually go to upgrade strength, we get bonuses to attack damage, which we normally wouldn't get while we're using other weapons. And again, the same goes with proficiency. Instead of 5, we would only get +2 attack damage. So upgrading our strength for the Greatsword would give us much bigger attack damage boost, which is why we want to make sure we're upgrading properly. And finally, for our dual wielding weapons, we're going to be scaling with willpower and strength. Again, meaning that if we were to upgrade our willpower, which in this case is what we've been doing because that's the weapons we've been running with, it upgrades our attack damage by 6 points, but strength only upgrades it by 2 points. So as long as you're scaling with your highest scaling stat or attack damage for your weapons, you'll be in good shape to be really powerful early. But keep in mind, if you do upgrade these stats and then you switch weapons to, let's say, a weapon that scales highly in strength like the Greatsword, if your strength's only 15 compared to your willpower, you're going to be doing significantly less damage, especially if that's the main stat that it scales with. So keep that in mind if you do happen to go switch weapons, that you may need to try and find one of these items, the Primeval Regression Orb, so you can actually reset your stats, reallocate them for more damage. Another quick tip is whether you happen to get stuck at a boss, you can actually use your Blade Nexus as a reset point where you can essentially farm XP or Lacrima. This will allow you to find better weapons and armor or even upgrade them to be more powerful. That way it should make some of the fights in your area a little bit easier if you're struggling. Additionally, you can farm straight up Lacrima or XP by running around farming enemies and gaining XP from them, and then essentially running back and resetting at your Blade Nexus, which means you can farm XP to get more powerful if you get stuck at any given area. Sometimes this can be easier than struggling with the same fight over and over and over if you're struggling or you do happen to feel under-leveled or underpowered for that area. The other tip we have is revolving gear. Now, specific rare pieces of gear will actually give you bonuses like attack damage bonuses for your swift attack, but also weapons give you things like 20% damage to certain enemies, which can be great for specific areas that you come across that have those specific enemy types, making them immensely easier. Some weapons will have those fixed attributes, where others will actually have that and random attributes as well for additional attack damage. So depending on the attacks you really like to run, pay attention to which attributes you can find because they can really affect the amount of damage you're doing. Also, finding weapons and armor and sets is a huge bump for the early game if you can max out or get a lot of a full set. For instance, the Hound set early on in the game is very, very powerful if you can find all the pieces because you get 5% damage increase, 10% stamina recovery rate, 10% damage increase against beasts, and 10% damage increase with potent blows. Again, other sets like the Ashen set, if you can find all those, are also really, really great for the bonuses they give you. Plus, if you get a full set of this, you get an extra Netherworld energy increase by 1. Keep in mind that different armor is different weights, so we have some armor that is lightweight at 4.4 pounds. Heavyweight armor is going to give you much more defense, but actually be a much higher weight. And again, this works for all the sets. You can mix and match sets, but ideally go for the set bonuses because they give you really big bonuses up front that can actually make you really powerful pretty early if you find or farm out a full set. Also, make sure you're using these items because you can't take them with you when you go. Throwables like Fire Spirit's Fuel can set tons of enemies in a pack on fire, as well as other things like the Fire Enhancer or Earth Enhancer. So using these items can actually put elemental effects on your weapons, which actually make them deal a lot more damage overall, and also being able to apply status effects to enemies so that way they burn for increased damage, sometimes upwards of 20% additional damage. Those are all the things to make you OP early no matter what weapon you're using in the First Berserker Khazan. If this helped you, drop a like on the video, subscribe if you're new, and if you haven't watched either of these videos, it could completely change the game for you.